Okay, welcome everybody. We're at the top of the hour and I see everybody flooding in here quite quickly. We've got a nice large group. Thanks for your interest in this webinar today. For those of you that don't know, I'm Executive Director for Conservatory Canada, Derek Auger, and it's my pleasure to be with you almost every Friday here throughout the academic year as we present various webinars and topics of interest, both to Conservatory Canada exams and also research in general. We do a lot of repertoire sessions here, and the names I'm seeing here of everyone attending today are all mostly familiar names. So thanks for joining me. Just about upcoming webinars, next Friday is Good Friday, so we're not going to have a webinar next Friday, but we're going to continue the following Friday, April 5, with U.S. Composer and musician Brock Chart, who I believe lives in Kansas City. And I held up this last time 2 weeks ago, a copy of one of his books that I came across last summer. And I played an example of that. If anyone's curious about his music, I think you will really like it in terms of contemporary music. The students really love it. I've been using it with my students for quite a while now, since September, and it's just full of really great music. He's going to come on and give us a repertoire session on these books, and I may twist his arm to come back and do a second one as well, because I know he's not going to possibly get through all the music in an hour. Go back and listen to the last webinar that I gave where I played a couple of those songs from that book I held up, just so you can hear the styles there. It's really interesting stuff, and I know a lot of you have already registered in advance. Beyond that, Christopher Norton's going to join us again for part 2 of his series on micro lessons. That's going to be on April 19th now. We were to have Eleanor and Cecile join us. They've been coming on every month, as most of you know, to talk about music by women composers. And they're not going to be able to join us after all on April 12th, but they're going to join us again either later in May or in the fall. They've been very instrumental in helping me out as we create our new piano repertoire series here at the Conservatory. And you're going to see a good chunk of the repertoire that's never been published before in a conservatory album with this music by suppressed and forgotten women composers. So we're quite excited about that, constantly unearthing new stuff. And I'm really grateful to Eleanor Gummer and Cecile DeRosier for that service they provide us. And I know you like the repertoire sessions as well. So to the matter at hand today, we have Dr. Scott Price here. I'm really happy to have him here today. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I didn't get a chance to share his bio with any of you, so I'm just going to read part of that here so you understand who Scott is and a little bit about what we're going to hear today. I know I gave you a little preamble in the emails, and a lot of you that has piqued your interest because we have a high number of people here registered and listening today live, which is great. Those of you watching on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, welcome as well. Those of you live, you're going to have a chance to ask questions later here from Dr. Price. So Scott Price currently serves as Carolina Distinguished Professor of Music at the University of South Carolina School of Music. He's internationally recognized for his work with students with autism and other special needs, and has presented solo recitals and workshops for piano teachers throughout the United States and for organizations in Australia, Brazil, Canada, South Korea, Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia. Dr. Price served for 23 years as creator and editor-in-chief of the online piano pedagogy journal, or the online piano pedagogy journal called Piano Pedagogy Forum, and has recorded 39 full-length recordings of educational piano music for Alfred Publishing Company, and has published educational compositions with Alfred Publishing Company and Tom Giroux Music, including his book, Autism and Piano Study, A Basic Teaching Vocabulary. Awards include the Best BGSU Outstanding Graduate Alumnus Award from Bowling Green University, or Bowling Green State University in 2002, the 2008 MTNA Francis Clark Keyboard Pedagogy Award, and being named a 2009 MTNA, sorry, you know what, where I was reading that from just expired. Sorry about that. I have to go back in and log in. Good old Google. It'll just take a moment. I'm sure it'll take me, I just logged in. It's going to take me back to there in just a moment. I do apologize. Awfully unfortunate. And lesson learned. Now, where was I? Sorry about that. 2008 MTNA Francis Clark Keyboard Pedagogy Award, being named a 2009 MTNA Foundation Fellow, and the 2012 Southeastern Conference Faculty Achievement Award from the University of South Carolina, the 2019 Francis Clark Center for Keyboard Pedagogy Outstanding Service Recognition Award, and the 2023 Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Cleveland Institute of Music. and also 2023 Teacher of the Year Award from the South Carolina Music Teachers Association. Dr. Price is the founder and director of the Carolina Life Song Initiative, dedicated to providing piano lesson and music experiences for students with special needs and in fostering best practices in teacher training. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Price now. If anyone has any questions throughout the webinar, please throw those in the Q&A box instead of the chat box. And we'll get to those later on at the end of the presentation, about 45 minutes to 60 minutes from now. So Dr. Price, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. It's just a joy to be with you, and I have to thank everybody at Conservatory Canada and all of you who are online. It's wonderful to be with you, and I really thank you for allowing me to share with you the work of some of my best friends and favorite people in the whole world. Before we start, I would just like to thank all of you who are doing this kind of work with students who need a little bit of a different approach in their teaching. You're all heroes in my heart. And I know people are always telling me, I don't know what to do. I'm afraid if I'm going to make a mistake. You're not going to make a mistake because you've already done the perfect thing by being present and giving this child a chance. That's all they ask for. And you're going to be a special person in their lives just for being there with them. So what I'd like to do today is maybe just talk a little bit about autism, what it is, and how it reframes my teaching so that I can meet the needs of my students. And then I'd like to just show you some video clips of real students in action during their lessons and how we put those things into practice to help them achieve their full potential. So I know everybody's heard about autism. And, you know, in a lot of piano teachers groups online, we'll often see people talking about different kinds of special needs or different kinds of diagnoses. And often, sometimes people offer a diagnosis in those groups without ever having seen the student or without ever having seen them in work in the lesson. So I'm a piano teacher. I cannot make a diagnosis of any kind. So I rely on a team of professionals and upon the parents to share that information with me so that I can change my teaching to meet their child's needs. Now, another question that comes up is sometimes, what if I don't get a diagnosis? Or what if the parents don't know? Or what if I suspect something? What do I do? Well, my answer there is, if you suspect something and you don't have a diagnosis or the parents don't know, we just change our teaching to meet the needs of the students. And that is what you would do for every other student that you encounter. So as we go along, those are just some examples of questions you might ask. And I always tell everyone that the only wrong or silly question is the one that doesn't get asked. So we'll have some time at the end of the webinar for anyone to ask anything that you want. And please don't feel uncomfortable. Everything is on the table and I'll do my best to answer. So the guide that we use here in the United States to diagnose autism is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Text Revision, version 5. So just for short, we refer to it as the DSM. And in that book, there are some very long and extensive criteria for diagnosing autism. And we had a change when this came out, the last version. Prior to this, we would refer to autism spectrum disorder, also Asperger's syndrome, and PDD-NOS, which means pervasive developmental delay not otherwise specified. So children might be categorized into one of those three areas. With the new version, we just have autism spectrum disorder, level 1, level 2, and level 3. So our students who are PDD-NOS or those with Asperger's syndrome might find themselves in autism level 1 needing very little assistance, and then autism 2 needing assistance, and number 3 needing a lot of assistance. The only reason I mention that is because sometimes we'll have students come to us who will still have old diagnoses, or they may self-identify or describe themselves as being in one of those other categories. So that's one of the things that we can encounter. So under that diagnosis of autism, we just need to know that it's a spectrum disorder. And what that means is every single student is going to be in a different place on that spectrum. Some may need a lot of assistance, others may need very little assistance, and every other one is going to be somewhere uh, on that spectrum. And there's a saying that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism because they're all different and they're all going to have a different, beautiful way of seeing the world and a different, beautiful way of communicating with all of us. So I just like to keep that in mind. Our medical literature also uses terms like low functioning, high functioning, words like deficit, delay. Those are all important in the medical diagnosis literature. For myself as a teacher, I like to use words like difference instead of deficit, just difference. That puts everybody on a level playing field, and I just know that my student might think a little bit differently or may communicate a little bit differently than me. Because my whole philosophy is making every student a part of and not allowing them to be seen as less than. My philosophy in my program is everybody come. It's my job to find a way to make music study possible for you. So, what are those things in the diagnostic criteria that can help me reframe my teaching? Well, there are three if I sort of boil those down into different categories. The first is a deficit or a difference in social behavior, a difference in social communication, and a difference in imaginative thought. So what do I mean by all of those? Well, if we were to meet in person at a conference or at a party or at someone's home, we would know how to behave or a certain set of behaviors that we could exhibit and put into action based upon our gender, based upon our age, our social situation, our titles, whether that was doctor or Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, and then also the level of social circle interaction that we have, whether we were meeting for the first time, whether we were acquaintances, whether we were friends, or whether we were family members of various levels. And then we also know a certain set of behaviors, as in how close we can stand to each other, personal space, or to wait to have a hand extended to us to be shaken, or whether we need to extend our hand. Then we would know how hard to squeeze the hand, and we would know through all of these unspoken communication cues when that contact is supposed to be broken. We would also know how much eye contact we could make. And then there are all sorts of unspoken cues that indicate to us when that communication exchange is over and we need to move on. And if that isn't difficult enough, then we have a whole set of behaviors that tell us how to dress, how to sit, when to speak, when to be quiet, and how to get ready for all of these events that are going to happen in our social behavior interactions. So the reason I bring that up is because a person with autism may not be able to navigate those social behaviors. You and I have been taught to a certain extent. We've observed these behaviors. We've worked through trial and error to learn what they mean. And then we've learned how to adjust and transfer them to other social situations. Well, a person with autism may not be able to observe those behaviors. They may not be able to understand and decode them. They may not be able to modify them and then transfer them to another situation. And I'll give you an example of that. So let's say it may be about 3:56 on a Monday afternoon, and my student with autism is so excited to come to the lesson. They're excited to see me. They're excited to make music. They've been thinking about it the whole week, and it's 3:56, and they're pounding on the door because they're so excited to get into the studio. So what I need to do is teach them all of the behaviors to get ready for the lesson. So what I'm going to do is put on what I like to call my perpetual smile, which is a real smile that involves my eyes and my facial expressions and also the sound of my voice. And I'll go to the door and open it and say, I am so glad to see you today. I am excited for your lesson. I know that you are too, but it's only 3:56 and I need to teach this other student until 4 o'clock. So can you wait patiently outside the door? And at 4 o'clock, I will open the door, I'll say hello, I will invite you in, and then you can come in my office, and then I will show you where to put your books. I will show you how to get your books ready for your lesson, where to put them on the piano, and then I'll help you get to the piano bench, and then do you think you can sit quietly and wait for instruction? If I don't teach those behaviors, this student doesn't know what to do. And all of these unknowns and all of these possibilities for mistakes can cause a lot of anxiety and frustration, which can lead to undesirable behaviors, whether those are behavioral outbursts or whether they are behavioral shutdowns. And outbursts can be anything from just a little bit of upset to screaming. And that shutdown can be just like you turned the light switch off and they have disappeared into their own world. And I find if I teach those behaviors, those things don't surface and the student feels comfortable in the space. So I teach all the behaviors necessary to navigate the lesson experience, whether that has to do with music making or not. So our second area, social communication. I need to remember that just because I have a student who is 16 years old and has autism, just because they're 16 years old chronologically, doesn't mean that their intellectual development is at 16 years, or their emotional development is at 16 years, or their fine and gross motor skills are at the development of a 16-year-old. So I need to remember that they may not have a vocabulary, or they may have a limited vocabulary, or they may be nonverbal, or they may be minimally verbal. So I have to remember that they may communicate in different ways. So mostly what that means for me as a teacher is that I need to explain the meanings of all the words that I'm going to use, and then I need to explain the meanings of those words in context. Because as musicians, we use this really weird vocabulary that doesn't mean much to our students sometimes. If I talk about a key on the piano, this is a key to them. And so they may be completely confused as to why I'm saying that. So I need to be careful to make sure that they understand all of those things in context. Because if you think of words that we use commonly like, well, let's play. Well, play means play. I need to be specific in saying, we want to play the piano. Then my student knows a certain set of behaviors and a certain set of movements they need to employ to make that work. So I've got to be very careful in my communication. And then our third area is imaginative thought. And think about the lessons that you teach. I know I teach them too. How much of that lesson depends upon analogy, metaphor, and imagery? Probably a very high percentage. But what if your student thinks and expresses themselves in very literal, specific, and detailed ways? So a lot of times analogy and metaphor and imagery don't mean much to them or don't help them do what they wish to do at the keyboard. And I'll give you an example of how I generally leave all of those three things, analogy, metaphor, and imagery, out of my teaching unless I explain specifically what they mean. So if I tell all of you, or if you tell your student, hey, look at measure 8 through measure 12, the phrase needs to grow there. Can you do that and make it grow more? Your students know that they need to make a crescendo there and that things need to get louder. Well, for my student with autism, if you think about what I just said in a very literal way, it's the most ridiculous thing I could have said. Because number one, people grow, grass grows, animals grow. And if I have a particularly bright student, they may look at me and say, well, I think you're wrong because you told me that when I play a key on the piano, the sound begins to decay and go away, and I can hear that. So how can it grow? And why are you telling me that? So you can see where that image and that analogy can start to cause frustration and confusion. So in a literal, detailed sense, what my student needs to learn is for that crescendo to happen, With finger number 1, touch the key very gently and push it down and make a gentle, quiet sound. Next finger, less gentle. Next finger strong. Next finger stronger. And next finger very strong. That way, they know in a literal and specific way what to do with every single finger to make a successively louder chain of sounds, which results in a crescendo. So that's very, very different from traditional teaching, and I had to get used to that, and I'm still getting used to it. So those are some of the ways that I use the autism diagnosis criteria to reframe my teaching. Differences in social behavior, make sure that I teach all of the behaviors necessary for the student to be successful in the lesson. Social communication, make sure that I observe and am aware of my students' level of communication, which could be nonverbal as well as verbal. And then I tend to avoid analogy, metaphor, and imagery, and opt for very literal and specific explanations of things in my teaching. And if I do all of these things, it seems to create an environment where my students feel safe, where they feel more relaxed, and where they feel comfortable expressing themselves and learning what they need to during the lesson. So let's see some of those young people. They're amazing and they can do amazing things. So what I'd like to do next is just sort of show you what a typical lesson might look like on any given afternoon in my class. So when my students come, usually in the afternoons, they have been overstimulated. They are hyper aware of everything that's going on around them. They may be oversensitive to a lot of things, whether that's the temperature outside, the clothing, the feel of the fabric that they're wearing, whether the change in the lighting might overstimulate them, the smells as they go from outside to the inside of the building, and then just the amount of people that are around them. And then the difference between their school classroom, mommy and daddy in the car, and me in the studio. So one of the first things I want to do is just give them a chance to sort of decompress and get ready for the lesson. And I just do that with a little chat. Just, how are you today? Tell me about school. Or tell me what you did in English class today. And I try to keep a memory of what sort of classes they're taking so that I can ask specific questions. I may get an answer, I may not. But what this is doing is allowing me to gauge my students' level of physical energy, their intellectual focus, their level of emotional awareness at that moment. And I'm also watching their fine and gross motor skills to see how this lesson is going to unfold as we go forward. So it serves a lot of purposes. And we're also practicing social behaviors and social communication, so they really know what's going to happen in the lesson. And then the next thing that I do is always ask for consent. Are you ready to begin? I've found that if I ask that student's permission to begin and they say yes, we are ready to go, and things are going to go a lot more smoothly than if I just autocratically say, we're going now and we're going to start playing. So almost always my students will say yes, but what if they say no? If they say no, I need to determine or ask if they need more time to get ready, or I need to determine if this is going to be an avoidance behavior. They're just saying no because they don't want to do something. And in that case, that's where the parents become our best resource. They can tell us if the student really needs a drink of water, if they need a bathroom break, or if we need to go ahead with the lesson. And if I need to exert my will as a teacher, I still use the perpetual smile and say, well, I think we're going to do some fun things. So it is time to get ready, and it is time for us to start. Can we start now? Yes, I know you're ready to start. Let's go. Then that sort of gives an explanation and a rationale behind what I'm doing. So then the next thing that I'm going to do, once I've gotten that consent, or I've made the student give me consent, is we are going to go through the lesson routine. This is one of the most important things that I do because my student with autism has a need to know what's going to happen throughout the lesson and what is always coming next. If they don't have that, frustration and anxiety and fear and lots of other behaviors can surface. So a routine can be as simple as, first, we are going to do right hand, left hand. Then we're going to do finger numbers. Then we're going to do white key names. Then we're going to do lesson book. Then we're going to do performance book. Then we will do improvisation. And then it will be time to say goodbye. What's next? What's first? And usually my student will tell me what's going to be first. Now, this routine can be done verbally. It can be written on a page. It can be an icon system that you use. Whatever works for your student works best, and you're the judge of that. So I know you're probably thinking, well, that's great, but I teach 30 students. I don't have time to make up 30 routines, or I lost my paper, or I can't find that notebook, or I forgot. It's been a rough day. Don't worry. Students with autism have a steel trap memory for lists and routines. So if you forget in the middle of the lesson what's next, just look at them and say, what's next? They'll tell you what's next. Or they'll point to it in the notebook, or they'll show you in some way that they know what comes next. So what I'd like to do next is just show you a couple of routines with real students and how we go about that. Take me just a second to share my screen. So our first student here is Aaron. Aaron was about 7 or 8 when he started taking piano lessons. Aaron is what we would call level 3 on the autism spectrum. He is nonverbal. He has some behavioral issues. He has intellectual delays. He also has fine and gross motor skill delays, but he is a wonderful young boy. And what you're going to hear a lot in his routine, that most of it has nothing to do with music making. It's all about teaching him the behaviors to get ready to start the lesson process. Hi, Aaron. Good. That was great waving. Good for you. Are you ready to play the piano? Aaron, Aaron, look at me. Are you ready to play the piano? Hands down. We're going to work on attention. We're going to work on eyes looking at the keyboard. We are going to work on taking turns. We're going to work on your fingers. We're going to work on playing black keys and playing white keys. Are you ready? Are you ready? Aaron, look at me. Look at me, Aaron. Aaron, Aaron, look at me. I'm here. Eyes looking at the keyboard. So he is a wonderful young man. And there are, besides the behaviors, there are a couple of other things to observe. There is one that I'm touching him a lot. And I know in today's society, we are very touch phobic with children, but often that touching is done in consultation with the parents, and it signals attention. It brings their attention back to focus on the keyboard, and it can also be a soothing kind of touching. And I always have a parent in the lesson with me because they are my #1 best resource. And I consult with them on how to do these things. And then they're consistent from lesson to lesson so that nothing can be misconstrued or misunderstood. Also, you notice that I was making Aaron make eye contact with me. And a lot of times students with autism do not make eye contact simply because they are trying to process all of the information that is coming into play. In this case, the parents were wanting him to work on eye contact, so that's why I was insisting on it during the lesson. But he's a wonderful young man. And it just brings to mind some of the accommodations that we need to make for lessons. And my parents are always on time for lessons. And one day Aaron was not on time, and I always get seriously worried when they don't show up. I'm afraid something has happened. So they came rushing up to the lesson. Aaron's mother is apologizing because apparently they stopped for lunch, and she didn't know that Aaron's fast food bag had ketchup in it, and he decided to draw ketchup all over his clothes. So they were actually down at the parking meter changing his clothes so they could get him up for the lesson. And so I always say that's fine. It's just not a problem because things happen. Sometimes I may get a call 10 minutes into the lesson saying something happened, we can't come today. And so I try my best to be as forgiving and accommodating as possible because our parents are dealing with situations that a lot of other parents don't have to deal with. So our next student's routine is Margaret. Margaret was born 3 months premature, almost blind from birth. Um, she had to have a lot of oxygen in the NICU ward. And what this can do is it can cause abnormal growth of blood vessels in the eye, which can result in detached retina and other vision problems. So she's nearly blind. Margaret has autistic tendencies. She has pretty profound developmental delays that affect her thinking, that affect her speech, and also her gross and fine motor skills. But she's a lovely young woman, and you're just going to see her routine. And I think at the end of this, I ask her what's first, and she goes right back and tells me what's first. All right, that sounds like fun.
Yes, now I play the piano.
Wait a second.
No, wait a second.
We're going to work on your fingers.
Work on your finger.
Work
Work on your palms.
and we're going to work on your scale.
Scale is jumping.
Yeah, jumping, good. You remember to jump on the scales. Then we're going to do your pieces.
Pieces.
And then we're going to do duets.
Oh,
And
boy.
it's time to go.
Now time to go.
All right, hands
And the
down,
last one.
hands in your lap. What are we going to do first?
Do you mind all parents?
Yes.
Mine is
Play your C. So isn't she wonderful? And that was her grandfather that you heard. Her grandfather and her grandmother were the ones who raised her. When she said jumping in terms of the scale, I believe that students are brilliant teachers in their own right. And part of my philosophy is whenever I have a student on the piano bench in my office, I'm the student, they are the teacher. And because she's blind, she has to find her hand position with the topography on the keyboard. And she understood changing hand position in the scale as jumping. And so that's what we used because that's what she understood and that's what she called it and volunteered to me. So she's pretty brilliant. And our last routine here is Brittany. Now, Brittany was born nearly 4 months premature. So she is blind from birth. She is profoundly autistic. She has profound developmental delays that affect her intellect. She is almost nonverbal, and she has some fine and gross motor skill delays as well. But as profound as her disabilities are, her music aptitude is equally profound on the other side of the spectrum. This is a young lady who, with limited instruction, taught herself to play the piano, and she can hear any song or any piece of music and then play it back in a simplified arrangement. So at the time that I met her, her parents estimated that she knew some 5,000 popular songs, classical melodies, show tunes, and hymns that she could play back in simplified arrangements. So this is Brittany's routine. And a difference with Brittany, as I learned later, is that tone is everything. She doesn't understand a lot of the words that I'm saying to her, but she understands the sounds of what's being done at the piano. And I need to remember that the late night radio DJ voice is what Brittany needs to hear the most, because that's what she responds to. Anything sharper could cause her to shut down in the lesson. Are you ready to go? Yes. Okay. Today we are going to do my turn, your turn. Then we're going to do fingers. Then we're going to do the bright sky.
My goodness.
Right. Then we're going to do the bright sky
My goodness.
with the new part. Then we're going to do fingers. Then Beethoven.
Sonata Opus 2, number 1.
Then we're going to do, if we have time, Brittany Scott duets. And then what's first? Yes, what's first? What are we going to do first? First, we are going to do So Brittany knew what was coming first, but her developmental delays are such that just using her mouth and her tongue to form the consonant of M, N, P, or T is so difficult that her parents educated me that sometimes she needed a little jump start to help it happen. And that was why I was saying my turn to help get her started. So we'll see a little bit more from Brittany a bit later on. So that's just an example of the routines that I give. And I found that to be really crucial, especially in the early lessons as the student is getting used to me and as they're getting used to the process so that they feel comfortable, they feel safe, and they always know what's going to happen next. So let's look at some real teaching right now. Our next young man is Aaron. And Aaron is working on some basics, such as playing the black keys on the keyboard, but in a very different way. If I'm teaching a traditional student who's neurotypical, I might say, well, take a look at the keyboard. We're going to work on groups of 2 black keys today. Can you look at the middle of the keyboard and see that group of 2? Great. Can you play that with right hand 2 and 3? Awesome. Now, can you watch me do it and try and do my hand position? Do it. Very good. Your turn. Now do it again. Yeah, do it again. Now, can you find another group of 2 black keys? And can you play a bunch more of those? And our students start to get the idea of what they're supposed to do. Well, if my student is very literal in their thinking, and if they need step-by-step detailed instruction, there were about 10 plus things that could have gone wrong because I assumed that my student gave me consent. I assumed that they were paying attention to me or giving me joint attention. I assumed they knew their colors. I assumed they could count and find groups of black keys. I assumed they knew their right and left hand. I assumed that they knew finger numbers. I assumed that they could attend to my model. I assumed that they had the physical ability to play 2 black keys at the same time. Then I assumed that they could transfer that skill to other groups of black keys. And then I basically didn't follow up with them, and I assumed that they understood the concept and could put it in action at home. So that's at least 10 places now where this segment of the lesson could have blown up, and it would have been my fault and not the students. So for Aaron, I need to break down that process into, are you ready to play a black key? Great, thank you. This is your right hand. This is your finger number 2. This is a black key on the piano. Can you take your right hand finger number 2? Can you touch this black key and can you push it down and make a sound? Great job. You just played a black key on the piano with your right hand finger number 2. Can you do it again? Very good. Can you do it 2 times? Very, very good. Can you play a different black key? So that's the process that Aaron needs, that step-by-step breakdown. And in this next video clip, because he's nonverbal and because of his intellectual delays, you'll see that a lot of this is hand over hand. And it also involves reminding him of his behaviors at the keyboard. And I make a horrible mistake in this video. That at the end, he is not playing a black key when I want him to. And if you watch, it's because I didn't say your turn, which is part of his behavioral routine. And the minute I say your turn, he looks right at me and then does exactly what I wanted him to do. So that's bad teaching. Really good. Hands down. Hey. Show me your ones. Show me your ones. Aaron. Aaron. Show me your ones. Where's your ones? Show me your ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Hooray, good job. Show me your 2s. There's your 3, 4, 5. Show me your 1s.
Yeah. That.
Good job. Wow, your fingers are awesome. Show me your 1s. Show me your 2s. Show me your 3s.
That,
Good.
that.
Yeah. Man, you're getting really, really good at this. Yeah. Okay. Let's work on playing your black keys. Look at your keyboard and put your hand down. You're fine. Look. Black key. Look down at your fingers. Black key. Look 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 at your fingers, Aaron. Black key. Look at your fingers. Black key. Black key. Play black key. Aaron, your turn. Play a black key. Good job. Good step. Aaron, look at your fingers. Play a black key. Yeah. Oh, come on. You won't even play one black key for me. Please play a black key, Aaron. Play a black key. It's your turn. Play a black key. Good job. Good job.
So big mistake on my part right there. And the worst part about it was that I could have gotten impatient with him. I could have chastised him for doing exactly what I had taught him to do. So live and learn, I guess. So the next clip that I'd like to show you is Stanton. Stanton was about 8 or 9 at the time that this video was taken. And he is what we would call level 2 to level 3 on the autism spectrum. He has some intellectual delays. He has speech delays, and he also has some fine and gross motor skill delays. But he's a wonderful young man. And what you're going to see is a window into his music reading process. And it's a little different for Stanton than it is for other students. So for Stanton, I work with a process that I like to call and label music reading, where he looks at the page, sees a dot, that dot immediately tells him to play this key on the piano and to hold it for a certain amount of time. Now, you might think, well, that's just rote learning. Yes, it is, and that it doesn't involve any understanding of the larger music theory and compositional construction of the piece. Well, over a longer period of time, this becomes true music reading and self-sufficiency, and also it becomes aural development where Stanton knows all of his major chords and how to play them at the piano, and he knows chord progressions and how everything fits together. He just may not be able to verbalize that for you or understand all the labels, but he can sure sit down at the keyboard and improvise or show you through his expressive capabilities that he understands how all of that is happening. So it just takes a longer period of time, and it's just more showing through doing rather than showing through speaking. So what we do for Stanton is I get his joint attention, then I get permission, and then we take a small bit of the music, we close the fall board and work on finger numbers, then key names, then I give a model, and then I work with him as he's executing that music himself. And I also like to do something here that I call working in the process, which means that I am with him every second, encouraging him and helping him, heading off mistakes before they happen so that there's nothing upsetting in his learning process as we go. He's just a fabulous young man. We work on as morning dawn.
yeah,
No? Yes?
yeah.
Yeah, good, good. You had to work on lines 1 and 2. Let's do line 1. Finger names. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1 and 4. Again. Ready? Go. 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1 and 4. Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
D, 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 E, F, E, G and A, F and A, E and A. Now my turn. Your turn. You ready? You ready? That's correct. Where's your right hand? Where's your right hand?
Oh, come on.
Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Very good. And E. And you ready? 1, 2, ready, go. You ready?
So he's just a wonderful young man. And as I said, yes, it is rote learning, but through a longer period of time, this truly becomes self-sufficient music reading. And Stanton is now almost 23, and he comes every Tuesday evening for a lesson, just like he has for years. And he has worked himself up to the point where he's about 2/3 of the way through the level 3 of the celebration series. So he's doing real well, plays on every recital. And he's also my scripter. And what that means, it's called scripting, which to help manage and self-regulate his emotions and his anxiety and frustration, he'll just say things sometimes. They can be movie scripts, TV scripts, something that he's heard on the internet, something that he's read. It could be phone numbers. Sometimes it's nonsense sounds. Um, and I need to let him do that in the lesson because that's how he's self-regulating. And I also have to listen very carefully because sometimes he may have seen a social situation where this script was used and he may be using that script to communicate something to me. So I always have to very quickly determine whether what he's saying is just scripting or whether it's communication. And 2 weeks ago, he just looked at me in the middle of a piece and just said, "Hey, do you remember that time I invented the printing press?" Which I'm sure is something that he heard on television somewhere. So he's just a wonderful young man. So our next video has to do with music counting, and this is Margaret again. And now because Margaret is blind, we have to do a lot of hand-over-hand teaching with her. I'm also working with her in the process by heading off mistakes before they happen and talking to her the entire time to help her. And we're also using what I like to call directive words for counting. Now for Margaret, numbers for her mean counting, and she may not necessarily understand the relationship between counts and beats, or she may get confused between numbers and counting and finger numbers. So it's this layering of abstract concepts, which is a problem for her. And for a lot of my students, the counting process that we use is directive words that are put into action like this. If I have a quarter half note pattern, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 1, 1, 2, it is play, 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 hold. That series of words tells my student exactly to do what with their body to make that counting happen in sound at the keyboard. Play, 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 hold. It could be C, D, E, hold, or finger numbers, 1, 2, 3, hold. Now they're still counting. They're still creating those proportions of sound at the keyboard. It's just a process that eliminates all of this abstraction and all of these layers of things from their thinking so that they can get the job done at the keyboard. So Margaret's wonderful. I think last summer we celebrated her 32nd birthday party. So she's doing real well. She doesn't study with me anymore. She's in a group home, but she's just a lovely person.
Bell, bashful butterfly.
Can you play it again? Remember to hold your notes, please.
Yes.
Both hands ready.
Your turn.
Are you ready? There, now you.
Now your turn. You don't get me say. You're saying bell, bashful butterfly.
So will you remember to hold your notes?
Yes.
Bye.
So she's just terrific. I love her so much. Now, Margaret never really, in all the years she studied with me, she never really progressed beyond about the mid to late elementary level. But the things that she could do throughout that level were amazing. She could improvise. She could do simple little compositions. She learned to read some of the Braille music code, and she certainly learned an enormous amount of repertoire at that level. So we did a lot of supplementing for her. And she's just a wonderful person. Now, this last video clip I'd like to show you is Brittany again, the girl who was born 4 months premature, but was really at the savant level in her music aptitude. And this is an example of how most of the teaching is nonverbal because she doesn't have a vocabulary of words that she understands. So you'll see me doing a lot of my turn, your turn with her on this Gurlitt piece. And you'll also hear her using syncopated pedaling, which is something that no one ever taught her to do. She just figured it out on her own. She's pretty brilliant. Just take me a second to cue this up.
Good. Can we work on the bright sky by
Good.
Gurlitt?
And we going to play the bright sky.
Can we work on the bright sky by Gurlitt?
Yeah.
All right. Listen.
All right. Yes.
I'm going to play, then it'll be your turn. Listen. Listen. Very good. Listen and down.
Listen.
Down. Good.
And go.
Listen. Your turn.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. The right way. Do it again. Right way. 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah.
The right way.
So isn't that a horrible thing to say to a child, do it the right way? But it has meaning in this situation, is that Brittany's vocabulary is very limited. And she is so precocious in her music aptitude that the way Gurlitt wrote it isn't good enough for her. She wants to jazz it up and do all of these other things. So that's the way she understands to play it Gurlitt's way. And if she does that, then she can play it Brittany's way. So that's just one of the things that she taught me and that her parents helped me understand. Now, all of those strange gesticulations that you saw her making are because that her entire life is music and the keyboard. And she gets so excited just by the sound of music. That's how she expresses that excitement. And you might have seen a pretty horrible hand position from Margaret and wonder, why isn't he doing anything about that? Well, please remember that Margaret has fine and gross motor skill delays, and that is the best that she can do for a hand position when she plays. And we can improve some of those things over time, but in some cases, we just have to let her do what she needs to do to be able to play and make music and enjoy and be part of a larger social circle. And I think that's what a lot of the lessons do and a lot of the recital experiences do, is they create community where students can be with their peers, doing something that their peers do. And they certainly have a great sense of pride in what they do. They know they're progressing. And it's also a situation where the parents can see their child doing something that every other child can do, maybe for the first time. And so that's why the music study is important. Certainly my students need to learn to read and count, be expressive, and to play the instrument with a certain amount of fluency. But it's more about the personal connection. Music is just the way that we do that. And it's the way that we help them feel like they are part of something and not constantly be told that they're less than. So that's what a typical lesson looks like. And then we say goodbye and we teach the behaviors on how to put the books back in the book bag, how to look at someone and say goodbye. And then sometimes my students need to know when they are coming back and at what time and on what day. So I'm happy to tell them that. And then they're on their way to go home and practice. So that's all that I really had to share with you today. And now I would be happy to take any questions and do my best to answer. And please remember, everything's on the table. The only wrong or silly question is the one that doesn't get asked.
Very good. So we'll get to those questions here. People, please put them in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A box, if you can. If you can't type into the Q&A box, just use the raise your hand feature within Zoom, and I can bring on your audio. I won't bring on your video, but I can bring on your audio so you can ask verbally if you have something a little more complicated. So one thing we just really appreciate, Dr. Price, is the way that you model your demeanor, your behavior, your compassion, really, I think, is rubbing off on us and understanding how to deal with these special kids. So that's the number one thing that struck me that we can really work with. And we really appreciate that, and seeing the video footage and the way that you work with them. It's interesting that, I mean, you wrote the book last year, finally, or it was published last year, but you were telling me before that this is 20 years in the making, really, at least 20 years of experience. Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and how you got into this type of teaching to this level?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think it was 1999, July of 1999, that Brittany's parents, the young lady that you saw in the video, they were looking for a piano, and they were at our local Yamaha dealer asking, well, do you think she could even have lessons? Because, she's blind. And so our Yamaha dealer called me and said, I'd like to put you in contact with the family. And that's how I started with my first student. And then at that time, parents just networked. And so 1 turned into 2, turned into 3, turned into 4. And now I've been really privileged to learn and be the student of all of these young people and their families over the years. And so we just have a great time.
That's wonderful. Okay, so to the questions here in the Q&A, Priscilla's asking, is this the same routine each week?
That's a great question, Priscilla. Especially when a student is new, and by new, I mean it might be throughout the first year or the first 6 months, the routine is the same every week, or the way I go about presenting the routine is the same every week. After the students get more comfortable, it's always written down in their practice notebook, so they pretty much know what the routine is before they come into the lesson. But I'll still kind of open activities and then close them off and say, next, let's do, just so that they know. But it's having some kind of routine, which really seems to help them.
And then Priscilla's also asking, she's curious about your thoughts regarding autistic children participating in group classes.
Oh, that's a really good question too. And I can give you the answer that a parent gave me once, which I thought was really brilliant. And that was that his son, although his son may have been in a group class, he said, remember that although you and I see him as being in a group and doing things with other children, that doesn't necessarily mean that he sees himself as being in a group. He may just be operating within his own sphere of what he wants to do. And so if that's great for a student, great. If it's not right for a student, I don't push it. I teach all of my students privately, and I may need to make accommodations. The student may need to have an aide with them or some parent or some kind of assistance. They may need accommodations in projects and in the instruction that's being given. And also they may need breaks because a group setting can be really intense with the pacing and with the amount of people there and the amount of verbal and nonverbal communication that's going on. So that's pretty much why I teach my students privately, is so we can manage all those things and help them be successful. But if it works, if group lessons work for you, great. That's what you should do.
And then the next question, what does your student intake entail, specifically with regard to parent awareness and involvement? And then what do you require from students at home?
Oh, that's a great question. I have some former students who are doing a lot of inclusive teaching, and they actually have a section on their intake form or their application which says, can you tell me anything that I need to know to best serve your child, whether that's an autism diagnosis, any other special need, or anything like that. And so often they will ask parents to divulge that information, always putting the child's welfare first. That makes it a little more comfortable for people to have a discussion instead of just saying, is your child autistic? That's a little invasive. So just, can you tell me anything I need to know to make this a better experience for you? Now, personally, my program here serves primarily children with autism, but we take children who have Down syndrome, ADD, ADHD, vision impairments, hearing impairments, cerebral palsy. And so parents come specifically for that. And so I never have to really say anything. They just start giving me this information over the phone. And then I ask some pointed questions so that I'm prepared when they actually come for the in-person meeting. And honestly, I think it's a lot like traditional application and interviews for students, is that I know the child can do things. I believe all children are brilliant until someone tells them they aren't. It's the parents I'm interviewing to see if I can work with the parents. And then as far as what they do at home, I like to use a 5-step learning process, which is also the practice process. And that is notes, fingering, small bits of music, counting, and then the 5-time rule. And what that means is they have to practice that small bit 5 times perfectly before they can move on. So it's notes, fingering, counting, small bits, and the 5-time rule. And then they go home with a lesson assignment notebook, just like every other student. And then they know that they have to work on all of those things. And that's their routine. And I never have to worry about practicing because it's just part of their routine. It's practice time and they do it. Isn't that a dream?
Somebody's asking how they order the book. I just put a link in the chat box to the website for Tom Giroux Music. Unless, Dr. Price, do you have another way people can order the book, or is that the best way to do it? Do you
Well,
think?
I think tomgirouxmusic.com is the best way to order it. It is available on Amazon as well, but it will be Tom Giroux that's fulfilling all of that. So if you just go to the Tom Giroux website, that's probably best.
That's the best way. Okay. And then someone's asking, how do you allow the student to decompress at the beginning of the lesson when they are nonverbal? What do you look
That's
for?
also a great question, and that involves the parents. The parents know their children inside and out. They know 24/7 what needs to be done. And so I usually do that in consultation with the parents. And then I get to know the child also, and I can pretty much tell if they need some decompression time or if they need to jump around, run up and down the hall, or if they need some little fidget toy or something. And that's fine with me. I would rather they do that and be successful in the lesson than just be a little ball of anxiety the entire time.
Right. Do you give students a choice for what to do first and next?
Not until we're really comfortable with each other and they're a little bit older. I like to maintain control over the lesson process. And so it's always first and then, or now and next. And they're usually going to follow that routine that's in the lesson book anyway, unless they start expressing their desire for a change in order. And then I usually honor that as well.
Right. Okay. Lots of thank yous here throughout the questions as well. by
Oh,
the
thank
way.
you all.
Great feedback. Do you teach kids with ADHD? And if so, do you use some of the same techniques?
I do. When I have a student with autism, often it's just not the autism. They will come with a lot of other challenges you saw in the videos. Some of them may have ADHD. In those cases, we just do a lot of kind and gentle redirecting of attention. I do a lot of prompting with my fingers to constantly get their peripheral vision focused back on the music. And we also work in a faster pacing. It's my own theory, which is unproven, so I can't give you a study to support it. But I've found that some of my students with ADHD are exceptionally bright, and they understand what I'm saying to them so quickly that they just get bored and move on to the next thing. So I trust that they're getting it, and then we just return to some repetition as needed and just move more quickly with them.
And then you find, or Marion finds that some children with autism pay more attention to what they see versus what they hear. Have you ever used pictures of different note patterns and finger patterns to help them understand instructions?
Oh, sure. Some of my colleagues, we have a saying, whatever works, works. You know your student best, you know what they need, and we give them whatever they need.
And that reminds me too, and I know I mentioned this to the audience before, but likely you haven't heard this, anyone. At Conservatory Canada for the exams, we do make accommodations quite regularly. If you've got something where you have a student who's going to take an exam and you know they're going to benefit from a slightly different way than we normally do things. And if you're new to us and you're not sure, we do have some mock exam demonstrations that I did a couple of years ago on the CCTV YouTube channel. Check those out. And if you know that a student could use something different, we've done things if we know in advance, the examiner can write out the technique that they're going to ask on a cue card to show the student so that they can verbally announce what's to come next, but the student can also read it. If you think those kind of things are valuable, please let us know and we can do our best to accommodate them that way. Another teacher's asking, do your students with autism perform? And if so, how do you manage the performance experience for the student?
Yes, all of mine play on the recital. They have repertoire, and then I also teach improvisation as a way to explain new musical concepts for them. So they're also required to improvise for the audience at the recital. And it's unprepared, although we do similar activities. I just turn to them and say, time to improvise, and they play for the audience. But this requires a new set of behaviors. So I choose the repertoire much further out than I would for a traditional student, and they're usually pieces that they have already learned. They may or may not have some choice depending upon what I observe to be appropriate. And then we teach the entire process. I will keep talking about when the recital is, what day and what time, how they show up early, what they are going to wear, which we may make accommodations for what they're going to wear. And then I take them to the venue so that they can see how the temperature is different, how the sound is different, how the lights are different, how the piano is different. So they can see where they're going to sit, how many steps they'll have to take up the stage. And then I teach them all of those behaviors in the lesson and we rehearse that so that it's recital time. I will come and get you. We will get your books ready. Then we will walk up on stage together. I will fix the bench. You will sit down. We will get your books ready. Then I will say, are you ready to play? Then I will count 1, 2, ready, go, and then we'll play. And then you'll finish that piece. And between, you don't clap for yourself. Then we'll do piece number 2. Then I'll ask you to improvise. And then we practice the bow, and you will take 1 bow, and then I will help you back to your chair and you'll sit quietly. So they also need to know what number they are on the program and what order their pieces are going to be in. And if I do all those things, then everything runs smoothly. So yeah, teaching all of those behaviors again. And then of course, they're kids, so things happen and you just have to roll with the punches, as they say.
It's such a detailed list, but you do think of everything and it does make a difference. Absolutely.
It sure does, yeah.
Do you have any assessment process prior to beginning lessons? For example, having parents come observe other lessons or meeting with parents and students for discussions?
Sure. I usually speak with parents over the phone and tell them more about the program. And then I usually get an idea of how their child might work within the program. And then we set up a meeting. And that's usually just to meet the parents. And then I try some things with the child just to see what their level of response is, how well they can work with routines, what their level of understanding and their vocabulary is, just so I can get to know them as much as possible. And then I either accept the student and say, we'll do our best, or if I think it's not right, I'll say, maybe in 6 months, call me back, or I'll try and find another situation for them. And I always do that very kindly. And I make it clear to my parents that when we start, if at some point you feel like this isn't working, I need for you to tell me, and I will find a better situation for you. Or if I feel like it's not working, I will tell you, and I'll still find a better situation for you, and I'll be there to support you 100%. All they really want is a chance. And so we give them a chance.
Is the goal to play music in any means possible, and do you primarily use rote?
Yep, the goal is any means possible. I do use rote teaching. Margaret was primarily a rote learner. Other students, as possible, I want them to be self-sufficient learners, just like you all do, and to be able to read and count and play expressively. With Margaret, she learned to compose a little bit just by making Braille letters on a piece of cardboard, and those had meaning for her as motives, and then she learned how to harmonize those motives and create them in pieces. So sometimes even the learning is an iPad video or an iPhone voice notes recording that parents will use in lessons. And I just have an agreement with them that it's for home use and it doesn't go on YouTube or Twitter or TikTok or Facebook. And they all honor that.
How long do the lessons usually take? How long do you book for with these students typically?
Oh gosh, the majority of the students take a half an hour lesson once a week. Some take 45 minutes once a week. Others might be ready for an hour a week. Brittany was taking 2 hours a week and she could have come every day for an hour. That's how precocious she was. When Aaron was starting, he came twice a week for 15 minutes. The parents could manage that. I realize not all parents can. But I would say primarily they are 30 minutes. And then if we get to a point where they can do more, then we bump that up.
And then Kim is asking, she has a student who's autistic with ADHD, but doesn't like to be touched. How would you help with that? And at this point, and I'm asking before each time I need to touch the hands, etc.
Oh, I think you just answered your question beautifully, Kim, is that I always ask, and I give a rationale. To help your finger play this key, it would be helpful if I could touch your finger to show you how to do it. Can I do that? And usually the student will allow me to touch them. It may only be for 2 seconds and then they'll push me away, but they usually allow it. And if not, then I rely on a teacher model, or sometimes if their hand is here, I might put my hand over them and demonstrate this way to help them out. But you do whatever works.
Very good. You do whatever works and you go with the flow. But you've given us a wonderful start with the vocabulary today. I'd encourage anyone to get the book and have a read through it. I'm partway through it myself, and I look forward to finishing it off. All sorts of wonderful ideas. Oh, one more question here. This came
Yeah.
up. Do you ever use games of any kind on the side to reinforce concepts?
I know a lot of teachers who do, and I think that's great. You do whatever your student needs. For my students who are level 2 and level 3 on the autism spectrum, often I don't, because a game is a game, the piano is piano, and they often don't understand the relationship between what we're doing in the game and then what we're doing at the keyboard. So I typically don't, but that if you need to do games, great, do games.
Yeah. And then I'm wondering too, do you teach level 1 ASD students a lot, or is it mainly
Yeah.
2 to 3?
Mhm.
You have
Yeah, we teach anybody
Yeah.
who wants to study, and I have one young man who's 16. He would be described as having Asperger's syndrome.
Mhm.
And I've learned to explain things and not use imagery and analogy, because the father comes to all the lessons, and a few times I said something and he would say, "Wait, did you understand what he said?" He
Yeah.
would ask his son, "Did you understand that?" And so that was my cue to change the teaching.
One person's commenting, all the explaining specifics and asking permission sounds like it would take a long time. How do you get anything done?
It does take a long time at first, but I've found it really crucial to establishing the framework. And then once we do that, it is a race to the end. It goes so fast. I have no time to be patient because I am constantly readjusting, rethinking, and catching up to my student because they're so brilliant.
Take the long view. Get a structure in place first. And
Yeah,
then
it is a long game. I think you said it the right way, Derek.
Okay. Well, everyone, thanks. Thanks for your attention today, for your questions. Dr. Price, thanks for being with us and getting us started on this journey that you've been through and sharing with it. We're very grateful.
Thank you all so
We can
much.
feel the attention everyone's given us. It's really great. Anyone, the replay's available. Share this with other people. I think there are a lot of people that registered that don't get to attend live, and maybe they don't realize they can watch this on the YouTube channel, but please share this with everybody else. Have a good long weekend. Next weekend, we won't see you next Friday, everybody, but we'll see you the week after on Friday, April 5 with Brock Chart. Dr. Price, thanks once again, and hopefully we can have you back sometime again. This was really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye for now.